Hello, and welcome back to Void Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy the Void Whispers that creep in during the dead of night, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1 on February 21st, during 5th period, somebody locked my friend Jason in a closet in our school's basement. He had gone down there during his free hour to help clean. That was just the kind of person Jason was. He did not have to be down there. Nobody asked him to go. He just went because he wanted to help. That is who he was. That night, he was admitted to the psychiatric ward at NMC for an indefinite stay. By the time Jason's parents realized he had not come home from band practice, he had already been locked in that closet for 5 hours. 5 hours alone in the dark, in a tiny room in the belly of a building that was supposed to be safe. 5 hours, and nobody noticed. Nobody came looking. Nobody even thought to check. We had talked during 4th period that day. German class was always a blow-off. We did not care about it, and neither did the teacher. She would hand out worksheets and then sit at her desk, scrolling through her phone, while the rest of us talked about whatever we wanted. Jason and I sat next to each other and spent the whole period talking about video games and bullshit homework and mindless small talk that did not mean anything and meant everything at the same time. The kind of conversation you only have with someone you are completely comfortable with. He had tucked his shirt in wrong that day, and I gave him shit for it. He laughed and fixed it, and then immediately untucked it again just to mess with me. We made plans to see a new horror movie that was playing at the theater downtown that weekend. The bell rang. We packed up our stuff and walked our separate ways down the hall. I went left. He went right. That was the last normal moment I had with my best friend. I did not see Jason in 6th period. I did not think much of it at the time. Sometimes he would skip a class to help a teacher set up for an event or to run an errand for the front office. It was not unusual for him to disappear for a period and then show up again like nothing happened. So I did not worry. I should have worried. Nobody heard him until later that evening. A student had come back to the school to collect some homework she had forgotten in her locker. She was walking toward the exit and passed by the basement door when she heard him. His voice was hoarse and squeaking and broken from hours of screaming into the dark. "Somebody, please, get me out. The door is locked. Someone is in here." He repeated those desperate pleas over and over. The same words again and again, in a voice that did not even sound human anymore. It sounded like something that had been scraped raw from the inside out. He must have sounded absolutely horrible, because I heard that the girl who found him sees a counselor now. When the custodian and the principal arrived and got the door open, they found the closet deathly quiet. Jason was not standing. He was not pounding on the door. He was not calling for help anymore. He was in the corner, shivering, curled into a tight ball, with his hands pressed over his ears so hard his knuckles were white. His head was tucked between his knees, and he was squeezing his legs over his hands to press them even tighter against his ears, like he was trying to block out every possible sound in the universe. He looked like a scared little kid hiding under a blanket during a thunderstorm. Not a kid who was about to graduate. Not a kid who was supposed to go to college. They do not know if he can go to college anymore. When his mom arrived and tried to gently pull his hands away from his ears, he lost it completely. He screamed and kicked and thrashed and spit. He did everything in his power to keep his ears covered. He shrieked that he could hear it. He begged them to go away. Then he broke down and started weeping, deep desperate sobs that shook his entire body as he scrabbled back into his curled-up position in the corner. The principal called an ambulance. Jason's mother had started crying, too, and his father stood there torn between comforting her and trying to figure out some way to help his son. When the paramedics arrived, they had to sedate Jason just to get him out of that closet. They transported him to Ennemitch, and his mother rode in the ambulance beside him. His father followed close behind in the family car. He has been there for 7 days now. Everybody loved Jason. I need you to understand that. Jason was, for lack of a better term, a nerd. We both were, honestly, but Jason was different from me. Where I prefer to keep to myself and stay in the background, Jason went out of his way to talk to strangers. He joined conversations he was not invited to, and somehow made everyone glad he did. He helped out with clubs that he was not even a member of, just for the fun of it. He would show up to set up chairs for events, or carry boxes for teachers, or tutor younger students in subjects he barely understood himself. He was nerdy and awkward, and sometimes he said weird things at the wrong time, but he had this genuine warmth about him that made people want to be around him. His hospital room is proof of how involved he was around the school. There are flowers from most of the clubs, cards from friends, a few bouquets from teachers he had helped out over the years. The room is full of evidence that this kid mattered to a lot of people. It has been raining for the past 3 days, so most of the flowers people brought have wilted in the window. The petals are drooping and brown and curling in on themselves. Jason is currently staring out that window. He has been staring out that window for days. His eyes are open, but they are not seeing anything. He just casts his gaze over the suburban neighborhood outside like he is watching television with the volume off. There is nothing behind those eyes anymore. No curiosity, no warmth, no Jason. It was one of the nurses who came up with the idea, I think. Somebody noticed that he was constantly trying to cover his ears, and they gave him a pair of earplugs. Simple as that. It took 2 plugs and tape over both of his ears to keep them in place, but once they were sealed, he calmed down enough to stop screaming. He is stable now, if you can call it that. He can stare out the window, and he can sleep without sobbing. That is the extent of his existence right now, staring and sleeping. He has not eaten since they found him in that closet. Not a single bite. He outright refuses to eat anything, and if they try to force it, he has to be physically restrained. They had to put in a feeding tube just to keep him alive. The boy who used to eat 2 lunches and still complain about being hungry will not open his mouth for a spoonful of soup. I have visited him every single day since it happened. I sit in the chair next to his bed and I talk to him. I tell him about school. I tell him about the movie we were supposed to see. I tell him stupid jokes that he would have laughed at a week ago, but he is not there anymore. Whatever happened to him in that basement took him somewhere far away, and I do not know how to bring him back. If you stand directly in front of him, his eyes just slide off of you like you are made of glass. They drift to whatever else in the room catches his attention, which is usually nothing. The doctors said it must be some kind of catatonic state brought on by being locked in the closet. They said it was a horrible case of undiagnosed claustrophobia. Undiagnosed claustrophobia. That is what they are going with. That is the official explanation for why my best friend is lying in a hospital bed with a feeding tube down his throat and tape over his ears, staring at wilted flowers in the rain. Let me tell you something about Jason. He and I have been watching horror movies together since we were old enough to know what they were. We would take turns begging each other's parents to let us rent the latest slasher or monster movie or found footage film that had caught our eye on television. We would stay up late on weekends with the lights off and the volume up and scare ourselves stupid. His parents used to laugh a lot back then. They would poke their heads in and tell us to keep it down, and we would pretend to be asleep until they left, and then start the movie again. We covered all of the classics over the years. Every franchise, every cult film, every obscure foreign horror movie we could get our hands on. But Jason always lit up the most whenever we would find one of his favorites. He had a fascination with those movies that went into the tight, dark spaces. The Descent, As Above, So Below. Movies about caves and tunnels and underground places where the walls close in and the darkness swallows everything. He loved those movies more than any other kind. He used to joke that his dream vacation was to drag me caving after a marathon of underground horror films. Crawling through narrow passages in the dark was literally his idea of a good time. That was his favorite thing in the world. Undiagnosed claustrophobia. No, I am not buying that. Not for a second. Something else happened in that closet. Something the doctors cannot explain because they were not there. Something that does not fit neatly into a diagnosis or a medical chart. I do not know what it is yet, but I am going to find out. I am going to that basement. Rich, up-to-date schools in upper-class neighborhoods come with a large variety of security infrastructure. They have cameras and alarm systems and sometimes even a guard or two, depending on how wealthy the area is. It would be incredibly difficult to break into one of those buildings without the help of someone who worked there. Fortunately for me, we did not attend one of the nice schools. Our school was old and underfunded and held together by duct tape and stubbornness. After midnight, nobody was in that building. They could not have afforded to hire a night guard, even if somebody volunteered to do it for free. Security was a joke. The cameras were mostly broken, and the ones that worked had not been checked in months. I arrived at the school well after midnight. The parking lot was empty, and the building sat in the dark like a sleeping animal. I made my way around to the side entrance. Our custodian always kept that door propped open, so he could step out and smoke without having to walk all the way around to the front. Sure enough, the door was cracked open just wide enough for me to slip through. I squeezed inside and stood in the dark hallway for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The overnight lights were on, but they were so dim they barely made a difference. Just a faint yellowish glow that made everything look sickly and wrong. I crept through the hallways toward the basement door. Something had to be in that closet that they did not see. There was no chance that Jason would be that destroyed from simply getting stuck in a small room. Not Jason. Not the kid who dreamed about crawling through caves for fun. Whatever happened to him down there was something else entirely, and I was going to find it. I reached the basement door and stopped. The opening was a black square cut into the wall ahead of me. None of the lights down there were on, and the dim overnight lights in the hallway behind me were far too weak to penetrate the darkness below. It was just a hole. A perfect rectangle of nothing staring back at me. I stood at the threshold and looked down into it and felt the first real prickle of doubt crawl up the back of my neck. I turned on my phone's flashlight and pointed it down the stairs. The beam cut through the dark and found a small string pull cord dangling from a bare bulb at the bottom. I walked down the steps and gave the string a quick pull. The bulb clicked on, and a weak, dusty light filled the immediate area around me. It did almost nothing to push back the darkness that pressed in from every direction, but it was still better than nothing. Relief washed over me in a small wave. I moved through the basement, pulling more cords and turning on more bulbs, until the space was as lit as it was going to get. To my left was the large boiler system that heated the building. It was a hulking metal thing that pumped and whined incessantly. Pipes ran out of it in every direction, disappearing into the walls and ceiling like mechanical veins. The sound it made was constant and oppressive. A low, grinding moan that vibrated through the floor and into my shoes. It was a miracle they could keep that thing running at all. To my right was a small work area where the custodians kept their tools. There was a workbench covered in random hardware and various pieces of landscaping equipment stored for the winter season. And tucked into the corner, unmarked and covered in a thick layer of dust, was the supply closet. It was plain. There was no real door frame of any kind. The door was just kind of set into the wall with a visible seam around the edges. A small placard on the front read supply in faded block letters. The doorknob was similarly plain and unremarkable, positioned toward the corner where the two walls met. The thick layer of dust on the knob was disturbed in the spots where the custodian, or whoever had locked Jason in there, had turned it before. I reached for the knob, and then I stopped. Something caught my attention. The door very clearly did not have a lock. There was no keyhole, no deadbolt, no latch, no mechanism of any kind that would allow this door to be locked from the outside. The doorknob was smooth and plain, and there was absolutely nowhere on that door to insert a key. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand. My best friend had been locked in this closet for 5 hours. That was the story. That was what everyone said. But this door could not be locked. It was physically impossible. I assumed the story must have gotten mixed up by the time it reached me. Maybe whoever shoved him in there had blocked the door with something heavy. A chair or a shelf or a piece of equipment pushed up against it to keep it shut. That thought made me shudder. I carefully looked around and made absolutely sure there were no objects nearby that could fall or shift or somehow block me inside. I moved a few things away from the closet just to be safe. Regardless of how well lit the basement was, and despite the fact that I was about to open a completely normal supply closet, I felt a deep pit of unease settling in my stomach. Whatever had been in this closet had turned my friend into a hollow shell of the person he used to be. That scared me. Logically, I understood that it was just a supply closet. It had been a week since Jason was found. The custodians had gone back to using it normally. Mops and cleaners had been moved in and out. It was a regular part of the school's daily operation. It was perfectly safe. There was nothing in there. There could not be anything in there. Opening the closet was a daunting task right up until I actually did it. I turned the knob and pulled, and then it was just a closet. So plainly and obviously just a closet that I felt a little stupid for coming all the way down here in the middle of the night. I reached in and pulled the light cord. A bulb clicked on and illuminated an ordinary array of cleaning supplies. Glass cleaner, spray bottles, rags folded and stacked on the shelves, a mop bucket sitting in the corner. The two side walls had shelves running their full length, and the back wall had a small wire rack mounted to it for hanging keys or jackets. In the opposite corner from the mop bucket there was a spot on the floor that was noticeably cleaner than the rest of the room. The concrete there had been scrubbed while the surrounding floor was still grimy and dusty. Mark, some dickhead in my science class, had spread a rumor that Jason pissed himself when it happened. That rumor had earned Mark more than a few dirty looks from Jason's friends. But looking at that clean patch, shining against the surrounding filth, it looked like Mark was right. What could have possibly scared him this much in this closet? Sure, it would be dark if the light was not working, but nobody had mentioned anything about the light being broken. It turned on just fine when I pulled the cord, and it even looked like they had replaced the bulb since the incident. And yes, 5 hours alone in the dark listening to that boiler shriek and moan through the walls would be unsettling. It would be unpleasant, but it would not do what was done to Jason. Not to a kid who wanted to go spelunking for fun. Not to a kid who watched underground horror movies and laughed at the scary parts. Something else happened in here. Something I was not seeing. Shaking off my earlier hesitation, I stepped into the closet to examine the corner where my best friend had spent those 5 hours curled up in the fetal position with his hands over his ears. The moment I took 2 steps inside the light bulb above my head, winked out. The closet went dim but not dark, because the doorway behind me was still open and the light from the basement spilled in, casting my silhouette onto the wire rack on the back wall in a rectangular spotlight. I nearly pissed myself. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. But then I sighed and shook my head and told myself to calm down. Bulbs burn out. That is what they do. I reached up and pulled the cord a few times in the classic turn it off and turn it back on attempt. Nothing. The bulb was dead. I reached further up and tried to tighten it in the socket, thinking maybe it had just come loose. My heart had just barely started to settle down from the panic of the light going out when something happened that turned my blood to ice. Out of the bottom edge of my peripheral vision, I saw my rectangle of light on the back wall begin to narrow. It bent and squeezed and shrank, and I realized with immediate and absolute panic that the door behind me was swinging shut. I whirled around just in time to see the last thin crack of light wink out as the door closed with an audible click. I scrambled to the door and pulled my phone out of my pocket and fumbled with the flashlight, fully intending to get the fuck out of this basement and never come back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I reached for the doorknob, and then I heard a second click, louder than the first, coming from the door. The sound was instantly recognizable. It was the sound of a lock engaging, a bolt sliding into place. I was sure I had imagined it. I was sure my panic was making me hear things that were not there, until I grabbed the knob and pulled. It did not move. I twisted it and yanked and pushed and pulled, and it did not budge. Not even a little. Somebody had locked it. That was the first thought that slammed through my brain. Someone had followed me in through the side door, or had been hiding down here in the basement, and had locked me in. That was the immediate and absolute conclusion my mind reached. Until I remembered that this door did not have a lock. Before I could process that impossibility, my flashlight turned off. The screen on my phone went dark a second later. I was standing in total blackness, holding a dead phone in a locked room that could not be locked. Panic set in fully. I fumbled around by the doorknob, using the thin lines of light seeping through the cracks around the door to try to see what I was doing. I yanked at the handle over and over, turning it frantically in every direction. Then I heard 3 quick pops from the basement behind the door, one after another. The light bulbs I had turned on out there were blowing in their sockets. Each pop killed a little more of the faint light bleeding through the cracks around the door. After the third one there was nothing, not even a sliver. The cracks went black. Every trace of light was gone. Up until that point, the closet had smelled like cleaning supplies and dust and cigarette smoke. Exactly what you would expect from a custodial closet in a rundown high school. But when the last bit of light disappeared from the cracks around the door, a new smell flooded the space. It hit me like a wall, the overwhelming, suffocating stench of rotten meat. Have you ever gone on vacation and come home to find that your refrigerator broke while you were away? Or opened a deep freezer packed with frozen meat that somebody forgot to plug in and left sitting through a long, hot summer? That kind of smell. The kind that does not just go up your nose, but invades your mouth and coats your tongue and stings your eyes and sinks into your clothes and your hair and your skin so deep you can still smell it hours later, even after you have showered. That is what filled that closet. Instantly and completely, like it had been waiting. I heard a deep, wet rasp of a breath inhale behind me, from the direction of the wire rack mounted on the back wall. It is a small closet, 3 feet by 3 feet. There was no space for anyone to be hiding in there. There were no vents, no cabinets, no hidden compartments, no way for anyone or anything to have snuck past me in that cramped space. I must have imagined the sound. That is what I told myself. My brain was in overdrive from the panic, and it was manufacturing sounds that were not real. I was scaring myself. That was all. In the brief rush of horror and panic and desperate denial that followed, I came to two realizations at the same time. The warmth spreading down my legs told me that this time I really had pissed myself. And the hot, muggy heat washing over the back of my neck told me that I was not alone in this closet. I froze. My whole body locked up. Every muscle went rigid. I could not move forward. I could not turn around. I could not even breathe. I know that the response is technically called fight or flight or freeze, and I froze. I froze completely and totally. The stench intensified until it was so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat. It nearly made me gag. It filled my lungs with every breath, and I could feel it settling into my body like a poison. I volunteered over the summer at a nursing home, and during my time there, I saw one man die. His name was Nate Ballin. He was not a small man. He did not take care of himself in any way. He was horribly overweight and horribly rude, and he was suffering from a terminal case of pneumonia. Those horrible, wet, gasping breaths he made toward the end have come back to me on nights when sleep is hard to find. The sound of fluid rattling in lungs that are drowning from the inside. The thick, gurgling wheeze of a body that is shutting down one system at a time. Another exhale rolled over the back of my neck, hot and wet and reeking. It sounded exactly like Nate Ballin in his final hours. Then it spoke to me. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It crooned in garbled words that I could not understand. The syllables tumbled over each other in a way that no human mouth could produce. There were too many teeth behind those words. I could not see them, but I could hear them. All of them, clicking and grinding against each other in a mouth that was far too large and far too full. I could smell the rot in them. That decay was coming from inside whatever was behind me, and I could feel them. If I had reached out my hand, I could have touched them. That knowledge sat in my mind like a stone. They were right there, inches from my skin. I did not reach out. I sank to my knees. The strength drained out of my body all at once like someone had pulled a plug. I crumpled to the floor, consumed by the overwhelming certainty that I was about to die. That whatever was in this closet with me was going to kill me, and that no one would find me until morning, and by then there would be nothing left to find. But I did not die. Its words stuck in my head. They echoed and reverberated through my thoughts, sliding across my consciousness, like a slug leaving a trail of something cold and slick behind it. It was the most disgusting experience I have ever had in my entire life. I did not understand the language. It was not English. It was not German. It was not anything I had ever heard. But the words burrowed into my brain anyway and made themselves at home. The breath on my neck got hotter. That overwhelming pressure that I had not even consciously registered until now increased to an unbearable weight. It was leaning closer, stretching, bending its mass toward me. I could feel the sheer size of it shifting in a space that should not have been able to contain it. It took a long, low breath right next to the nape of my neck, slow and deliberate, tasting me. Sampling the air around my skin like a predator deciding if it was hungry enough to eat. It was much, much larger than me. I began to sob. It let out a low, contented sigh that sounded horribly like satisfaction, like a person settling into a comfortable chair after a long day. The pressure released slightly as it retreated a few inches back into whatever impossible space it occupied behind me. I felt a brief flash of relief so intense It almost made me dizzy. Then I heard its teeth click. The sound of them was unmistakable, hard surfaces tapping against each other in rapid succession. Its jaws, however many it had, began to creak and pop, and yawn opened behind me. The sound was wet and mechanical at the same time, like bones being pulled apart and reassembled, like something unfolding itself. I realized then that I could no longer hear the boiler. That oppressive, bleeding whine that had been constant since I entered the basement was gone. I could not hear anything, actually. I could not hear my own rapid breathing. I could not hear my hands scrabbling desperately at the door handle. I could not hear myself when I started to scream. The only sound in existence was whatever was happening behind me. Everything else had been swallowed. Then, the jaws stopped their popping and creaking. They settled into whatever configuration they had been working toward. And it began to sing. I could not hear a single other thing in the universe, but I could do nothing to stop that awful, grating, rasping voice as it tore through my skull like a white, hot iron being driven through the center of my brain. Except it was not hot. It was cold. Bone deep, paralyzing cold. And it was sick. The melody, if you could call it, that was saturated with a wrongness that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. And underneath all of it, woven into every note and every horrible grinding syllable, was hunger. It was so very, very hungry. A hunger so vast and so ancient that my human brain could barely register it without breaking. It was not just hungry for food. It was hungry for something deeper, something fundamental, something that I had and it wanted. I tried to block it out. I dropped to my knees and pressed my hands over my ears as tight as I could. I curled into the same position they found Jason in, head between my knees, hands over my ears, legs squeezing down over my hands to press them tighter. I screamed as loud as I could. I screamed for somebody. Anybody, please, help me. Somebody help me. But I had come at night, and my school could not afford a night guard. Nobody was coming. I sat there in that position for what felt like hours. Maybe it was hours. Maybe it was minutes. Time had stopped meaning anything. The breath continued to cascade over my neck in hot, wet waves, and the stench sat in my head like a living thing that had taken up residence behind my eyes. Finally, I felt it approach again. It inched closer to my sweat-soaked skin, and I could feel the air displacement as its mass moved toward me. Something touched the base of my neck. A huge mass of cold, raw, dead flesh and muscle pressed against my skin and traveled slowly up the back of my head. It was wet and rough and impossibly large. Then it retreated, followed by another one of those satisfied sighs. It licked me. I blacked out. I dreamed then. I dreamed of a giant feast. A grand table stretched out to either side of me so far in both directions that I could not see where it ended. The table was covered with trays and plates, piled high with cuts of meat in every variety imaginable. Lamb chops, venison steaks, frog legs, chicken legs roasted to golden perfection, turkey drumsticks the size of softballs. Every side dish you could possibly want was there. Mountains of mashed potatoes, bowls of gravy, bread rolls still steaming from the oven. I gorged myself. I reached and grabbed and bit and chewed and swallowed and drank and reached for more. I ate like I had never eaten before in my life, like I had been starving for years, and this was the first meal I had seen. But nothing I ate satisfied me. Nothing even came close. That gnawing, ever-present hunger clawed at the walls of my stomach like an animal trying to dig its way out. No matter how much I consumed, the emptiness only grew. Its song played throughout the dream. That beautiful rasping melody of meat and teeth wove itself through the feast like background music, at a restaurant. At some point, the meat on the table began to taste different. That horrible, rotten flavor from the closet crept into every bite. The texture changed. The meat became soft and slick and wrong. I did not care. I did not stop. I would have killed anyone who tried to get between me and that food. I was delirious with hunger. The whole time as I feasted it sang to me in that chattering, whispering, crooning tone. It sang about how good it is to gorge and bite and swallow and to taste. It sang about how I could help it. It sang about how hungry it was. How hungry we were. I woke up at home in my bed. I was undressed, and the sheets were soaked through with sweat. I turned my head slowly to the other side of the room and saw my alarm clock displaying 4:30 in the morning in bright red lead numbers. The mattress was wet beneath me, and I realized I had pissed myself again. It was all I could do to strip the sheets and throw them in the washing machine and clean myself up before collapsing back into the bare mattress. And then it was Friday. My alarm went off at the usual time. My mom made breakfast and left for work. I had school in an hour. Everything was normal. The sun was up, and the house smelled like coffee and toast, and everything that had happened in the dark felt far away, almost like it had not happened at all. I made myself as large of a breakfast as I could reasonably get away with before my parents would accuse me of being a glutton. Eggs and bacon and toast and cereal and a glass of orange juice. I was halfway through eating when I caught a whiff of that horrible, rotten stench. I froze with a fork halfway to my mouth. My stomach clenched. I got up and examined the fridge. Somebody had forgotten a takeout container shoved in the back behind the milk. I pulled it out and tossed it in the garbage, and the sour taste in my mouth faded when the lid closed. That dream kept rattling around in my head, though. I could still feel that weird, gnawing hunger sitting in my stomach like an empty hole that food could not fill. I kept telling myself it must have been some weird combination of sleepwalking and a fever dream. Some bizarre stress response that caused me to piss my bed on a Thursday night and have the most vivid nightmare of my life. That was the rational explanation. That was the one I was going with. But that rotten taste was still lingering in the back of my throat, and that gnawing hunger was still there. Fainter now, but present. Always present. School passed at a snail's pace. Jason was yesterday's news at that point. People were talking about it less and less. The school had officially chalked it up to a cruel prank played by unknown students and had not bothered to investigate any further. Everyone accepted the claustrophobia diagnosis. It was clean and simple, and did not require anyone to think too hard about what might actually be lurking in the basement of a building where they sent their children every day. Honestly, at that point, part of me hoped they were right. Part of me wanted to believe that Jason really was just claustrophobic, and that what I experienced in the closet was just my own fear feeding on itself in the dark. That was so much easier to accept than the alternative. At lunch, I ate the food I had packed from home. Then I went up and got a hot lunch from the cafeteria. Then I went back and got a second one. I was insatiable. I could not get full no matter how much I ate. Nothing did the trick. My mind kept swinging back to food, but every time it did, that same sick feeling would pulse through my brain, and I would get nauseous. Thoughts of steak and ribs and burnt ends would fill my head, followed immediately by that rotten stench burning like acid on my tongue, and then a sharp gnawing pain in my stomach that doubled me over. The hunger and the nausea existed simultaneously, canceling each other out and feeding each other at the same time. The implications of this were not lost on me. The dream, the hunger, the way it sang about feasting and biting and tasting. I knew what was happening, even if I did not want to admit it. I decided I would wait until after school and go back down to the basement and check the room for real this time. I would do it right. I would prop the door open with one of the cinder blocks sitting behind the shop building so it could not swing shut on me. I would bring a real flashlight. And I would make sure once and for all that what happened last night was just a dream. Just my imagination running wild in a dark room. Nothing more. I had to. That rotten stench was invading my space more and more as the day went on. It came in waves, sometimes faint like a memory, and sometimes so strong it made my eyes water. In my history class, a girl sitting near me wrinkled her nose and gave me a disgusted look, and picked up her things and moved to a different seat across the room. At least I was not the only one who could smell it. That thought was not comforting. I had to clear my head. I just had to go back down to the basement. It was after 8 when I finally left the locker room I had been hiding and waiting for the building to empty. I hauled the cement cinder block through the dark hallways toward the basement. The school looked different at night. The hallways stretched out ahead of me, long and dark and distorted in ways that felt intentional, like the building itself was rearranging when I was not looking. I felt that slow pulse of fear rising in my chest the same way it had the night before. I arrived at the top of the basement stairs. That familiar black rectangle opened up below me, the entrance to something I should have stayed away from. Except this time, it was not just an expanse of black. Somebody was down there. Multiple somebodies, actually. I could hear voices coming from the far corner near the boiler. I stopped at the top of the stairs and listened. Does it not feel weird being down here after what happened? A guy was talking. He sounded like he was around my age, probably another student. What, just because some shithead is scared of the dark, we are supposed to feel guilty? A second voice, harder, meaner. I froze at the top of the stairs. My grip on the cinder block tightened until my knuckles went white. A third voice piped up. This one laughed before speaking. The sound of it made my skin crawl. I heard he pissed himself. Goody fucking Two Shoes wanted to go and help clean the basement when nobody asked him to. Maybe, if he minded his own business, he would not be at NMC right now. His friends murmured their agreement with a laugh. I heard someone pat someone else on the shoulder. These were the guys who put Jason in that closet. They were right there, 10 feet below me in the dark, casually joking about what they had done to my best friend. He had caught them in the middle of something, and they decided he deserved to be locked in that room for it. I smelled it then. Cigarette smoke. Whether it was some bullshit, teenage rebellious act, or a way to hide the habit from their parents at home, these idiots had decided that the school basement was a good place to smoke. If Jason really did come down here to help clean during 5th period, he would have walked right into them. He would have seen them plain as day. And knowing Jason, he probably would have said something about how dangerous and stupid it was to smoke cigarettes in an old basement surrounded by decades of dust and chemicals and a boiler that was held together with rust and prayers. And then there was another smell underneath the cigarette smoke. One that the smoke was failing to cover. That deep, horrible tang of rotten meat left out in the sun. It was back. It was here. And this time it was not hiding. I heard the words then. Again, that garbled, whispering, crooning voice slid into my head and wrapped itself around my thoughts like a vine around a fence post. The light above me at the top of the stairs popped and went dark. A second later, the light they had on down there popped too. The basement was thrust into total darkness. The door at the top of the stairs swung shut behind me. It was there again. I could tell by the all-encompassing smell that filled every cubic inch of air around me. I could tell by the sound of its teeth clicking against each other as its jaws opened and closed in their multitudes. Not one mouth. Not two. More than I could count. Each one clicking and grinding independently. It whispered to me about the boys, and this time I could understand what it was saying. Every word, every syllable, crystal clear. It told me what they did to Jason, how he came down the stairs with his cleaning supplies and found them smoking by the boiler, how he told them they should stop, how they grabbed him and shoved him into the closet and wedged something against the door and laughed and went back to their cigarettes, how it found Jason alone in the dark, how it tried to tell him what it had told me, about the feast, about the beautiful act of eating, about how good it feels to gorge and bite and swallow and taste. But Jason did not understand. Jason was scared. He was not strong enough to hear the song. He was not ready. He could not help it. But I can help. It whispered to me about how it could help Jason, how it was old and tired and weak, but it did not have to be. And after it was not weak anymore, we could save Jason together. We could fix him. We could bring him back. It whispered in my ear and in my blood and in that rotten, pulsing mass of sickness in my head that it could not do it without me. How hungry it was. How hungry we were. Tens or 20s or hundreds of mouths chattered and barked and mumbled and shrieked and laughed and screamed and cried to me through that impossible tangle of meat and teeth that I could only imagine sat lurking in the dark behind me. Each voice distinct, each one desperate, each one starving. I felt the gnawing, gaping chasm in my stomach yawn, open even further. It widened and deepened until it felt like my insides were being pulled apart. The pain nearly doubled me over. It began to raise its voice to a crescendo. The song built and built and built, singing and screaming and whispering all at once, telling me exactly where those boys were hiding in that basement. They were pressed against the far wall near the boiler. They were holding on to each other. They could not hear the boiler anymore. It had gone silent for them, too. Everything had gone silent except the song. They heard it sing. And they were terrified. It told me where they were hiding, but I did not need it to tell me anymore. My mouth was flooding with saliva so fast I could barely swallow. That rotten stench had deepened and broadened and suffused itself so thoroughly into every one of my senses that I had almost gotten used to it. It was not repulsive anymore. It was familiar. It was part of me. And underneath the rot, I smelled something else. I smelled them. The salt of their sweat clinging to their skin. The sharp chemical stink of cigarettes clinging to their rapid panicked breaths. The copper hint of blood pumping hard and fast through veins that were flooded with adrenaline. Drool dropped from my mouth in a steady stream. It fell through the hole in the cinder block I was still holding and dripped onto the floor in heavy drops that I could hear, even though I should not have been able to hear anything. They were scared. Good, it was going to be easy. Those bastards. Those pathetic, cowardly bastards who had shoved Jason into the dark and left him there alone with something he was not ready to face. They forced him into the presence of something ancient and hungry and overwhelming, and then walked away laughing. They did that to my best friend, the kid who helped everyone. The kid who joined clubs he did not belong to just because he wanted to be useful. The kid who tucked his shirt in wrong and laughed when I gave him shit for it. They took that kid and they broke him. And now he was lying in a hospital bed with tape over his ears and a feeding tube in his throat, staring at dead flowers in the rain. The time for waiting is done. Soon will be the time for harvest. I am starving, and I finally know what it has been telling me to eat. Story 2. Static crackling from the television in the living room wakes me. Not that I was really asleep. I have not had a full night of sleep in so long that I honestly cannot remember when the last one was. When you get to my age, the days stop having edges. They just bleed into one another. each one a smudged copy of the one before it. I could not tell you what I did yesterday. I could not even tell you what I had for breakfast. My papa always used to say that. He has been gone for 30 years now, but I can still hear him saying it, still hear the little chuckle that always followed. He thought he was the funniest man on earth, even if nobody else agreed. I loved him for that. I loved him for a lot of things, and I hated him for others, but the chuckle is what stayed. The static grows louder. I try to ignore it. I turn onto my side and pull the pillow over my head, pressing it down against my ears. I know it will not work. It has never worked. This is just what I do. It is my way of delaying what comes next, putting a few more seconds between me and the thing I know I have to face. I know that the only way I will get any rest tonight is if I go in there. The only way the sound stops is if I deal with her. Still, you cannot blame an old man for trying. I hold off as long as I can. I start humming, trying to drown out the steady hiss that keeps pushing through the walls. It is not just a sound, it is a pressure, a weight that fills the apartment like water rising in a sealed room. When humming stops helping, I start rocking back and forth on the mattress. The old springs scream beneath me, rusty and sharp, and I let their noise join my effort to block everything else out. Then the static stops. The apartment fills with silence so complete it feels solid. I freeze. My hands are still pressing the pillow over my head. I am holding my breath. I am terrified to make even the smallest sound, because this has never happened before. Every other night, every single time I have had to get up, I have had to walk out there and turn the television off myself. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. But tonight, the static just stopped on its own. A moment passes before I let myself relax. I release my breath slowly, carefully, as if the air itself might break something. I start to move the pillow away from my face, and then a voice drifts through the apartment. Soft, sweet, a child's voice, singing, "Sleep, my darling tiny one, tucked within your bed so tight, else the old gray wolf will come and grab you by your side." My blood turns to ice. I know that voice. I have known it for longer than I have known almost anything else in this world. Sophia? My own voice comes out as a dry croak, and the sound of it reminds me of how long it has been since I spoke out loud to anyone. There has been no need for it. Not for years. The dead have no use for pleasantries, and neither do the people who made them that way. Her sweet little voice continues to sing as I push my body up off the sagging mattress. My arms shake. My legs feel like they belong to someone else. I swing them over the edge of the bed and place my bare feet on the cold floor. The chill shoots up through my ankles and into my spine. He will snatch you up between his teeth, if on the bed's edge you sleep, and drag you to the forest deep, beneath the quaking tree. With each step I take across the bedroom floor, I become more and more aware that I am not in control. My body is moving, but I am not the one moving it. Her voice is pulling me forward like a hook in my chest. It is a beacon, a signal I cannot resist. I have to go to her. I have to end this. Every night I tell myself the same thing, and every night I go. When I reach the bedroom door, I try to stop. I reach my hands out and grab for the doorframe. My fingers brush the wood, barely bending at the knuckles in a pathetic attempt to hold on. But my feet keep moving, and my hands slide off the frame as if it were coated in oil. The hallway looks different tonight. Darker than usual, the shadows feel thicker, heavier, like something has been poured into the air between my bedroom and the living room. What is normally a short walk now looks like a tunnel, long and narrow, and the only light comes from the far end, from the glow of that television and its static-filled screen. As soon as I see it, I feel tears begin to slide down my cheeks. I am so tired. I am so utterly, completely tired of this. I just want it to stop. I want one night where I can close my eyes and not have to get up. One night where there is no static, no singing, no screen full of things I do not want to see. But that is not how this works. That has never been how this works. I walk into the living room and stand in front of the television. My body tries to sit down in the recliner behind me. I fight it. I fight it with everything I have, which is not much. The tears are coming faster now, running down the creases of my face, and I can feel myself losing. Whatever force has its hands on me is stronger than I am. It has always been stronger. There is a sharp crack as my knees give out and I slam down into the chair. The recliner rocks back violently from the sudden weight of my body before settling into place with a groan. I try to push myself up. I grip the armrests and strain with every bit of strength left in my arms. But my body is heavy, impossibly heavy, as if something is sitting on my chest, pressing me down into the cushion. I know this fight. I have fought it many times. I know how it ends. Her voice finishes the song, and for one brief second the apartment is silent again. Then the static screen blinks off, goes black for just a heartbeat, and when it comes back, the static is gone. In its place is a scene I know better than my own reflection. Sweet little Sophia, my baby sister. Her pale blonde hair is done up in two delicate pigtails, each one tied with a pink bow that our mama had placed with care. She is wearing her pink lace dress, the one that made her look like a porcelain doll you would see in a shop window. She is sitting on the floor of our family room, playing with her favorite toy, a little rag doll that Papa had made for her third birthday. Even after all these years, even now, I still feel that old sting of jealousy in my stomach when I look at that doll. I was 6 years older than her. I was his firstborn. And the only thing Papa ever gave me was a beating, deserved or not. The scene on the television switches with a click. Now it shows Sophia walking down a worn dirt road, her tiny hand wrapped inside the hand of a tall, lanky boy. I know that boy is me. I am practically dragging her behind me, barely giving her time to get her feet under her after she stumbles. She is crying. She is upset about the dirt on her pretty pink dress, about the scrapes on her knees, about the fact that her big brother will not slow down. I did not care about her tears. I never did. It always made me happy when she cried. There was something about the sound that satisfied a place inside me that nothing else could reach. The screen clicks again. Now I am leading Sophia up an embankment. Her face is bright red from crying, her little chest heaving, but I do not slow down. I am on a mission. We reach the top and stand there looking down at the river. It is rushing fast, swollen with rain, dark and cold. Only a short grassy slope separates us from the water. I can see the fear on her face, both in the memory and on the screen. She was terrified of the river. She had always been terrified of it. I watch myself kneel beside my sister and wrap my arms around her. I pull her into what looks like a loving embrace. I am humming to her, the lullaby. The one Mama sang to us every night before bed. After a moment, Sophia's sweet little voice begins to sing along, the words coming out between hiccups and sniffles. So close your eyes and fall asleep. Count the little woolly sheep, tucked so tightly you must keep, or he will come for you. I feel the tears start again, hot and stinging, as I watch her tiny hands wrap around my waist. I watch myself pick her up and carry her down the bank toward the edge of the river. I cannot see my own face on the screen, but I know what I was whispering. Trust me. Trust your big brother. I would never hurt you. She is nodding. Her eyes are still wet, her cheeks still flushed, But she believes me. She trusts me completely, the way only a small child can trust, without question, without doubt, without any understanding that the person holding them might be the most dangerous thing in their world. I use that trust. I tighten my grip on her hand and swing her out into the water. She does not even have time to understand what is happening. Before her mouth can open, before the scream can form, I have my hands on those pigtails. I am pushing her head under the rushing current. I am holding her there while the water does the rest. The screen clicks again. I grip the armrests of my recliner so hard my knuckles turn white. I watch her tiny body shudder beneath the surface. I watch the fight drain out of her in stages. First the thrashing, then the twitching, then nothing at all. She goes limp. I watch her ragdoll, the one Papa made, the one she had clutched to her chest until the very end, slip from her fingers and float away down the river. For a moment I consider letting her follow it, letting the current take her away so that no one would ever find her. But I know that is not an option. Someone would look. Someone would find the body downstream. So I lift her up. I cradle her against my chest. Her head falls back, her pigtails dripping, her pink dress dark with water. And I run. I run as fast as I can toward our house. The television cuts back to static, and the hiss fills the room again. I loosen my grip on the armrests. My fingers ache. My heart is pounding. But the worst part is over. The nightmare has played itself out, the same way it always does. And now I can try to sleep. I should have known better than to fight it. I should have just come in here the moment the static started and let it run its course. I let out a small yawn and begin to push myself up from the chair. Except I do not move. I try again. I put everything I have into my arms, pushing down on the armrests, straining to lift my body out of the seat. But the more I struggle, the more I feel something holding me back. It is not just heaviness this time. It is resistance. Active, deliberate resistance, as if the chair itself has closed around me. The static from the television grows louder, not just louder. Deafening, it pounds against my eardrums like fists against a door. Then the screen clicks again. A face appears. A woman's face. She is beautiful. Blonde hair falling in soft curls around a heart-shaped face. Crystal blue eyes staring at me through the glass with an intensity that makes my stomach drop. The screen clicks. Her body lies on a moss-covered forest floor, those same blue eyes now glassy and empty. Blood trickles from her full lips and runs in a thin line down her chin. The screen clicks again. Another woman. Blue eyes. Blonde hair. Just as beautiful as the first. Different face, same type. The same type it was always going to be. Click, the bruised flesh of her naked body stands out against the dark blue carpet she is lying on. Her vacant blue eyes stare at me through the screen as if she can see me sitting here. Click, short blonde hair this time, dark blue eyes. Same beautiful, heart-shaped face. She is smiling in the photograph. She does not know what is coming. Click, a ruined face. Red with blood and worse. Blue eyes still open, staring at me through a mask of destruction. Click, another, click, click, click. One after another, they appear on the screen. All of them. Every single blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman whose life I took. Their faces alive and then their faces dead, alternating so fast the images begin to blur, but never fast enough that I cannot recognize each one. My heart is slamming against my ribs now, and I can feel bile rising in my throat. What is happening? This has never happened before. It has always been Sophia. Always just my sister. The first one. The only one I ever felt any real remorse for. The others came after. Each one a repetition, a recreation, an attempt to feel that same rush, that same satisfaction. But this screen has never shown them to me before. This was not part of the routine. The television cuts back to static, and the sound is no longer just loud. It is inside me. It vibrates through my bones, through my teeth, through the walls of my skull. I can feel something warm and wet running from my nose. I lift my hand and touch it. Blood. My tears are hot now, hotter than they should be, and it takes me a moment to understand why. They are not tears. They are blood. Blood is streaming from my eyes, tracing the same paths the tears followed moments ago. I try to scream for help. I open my mouth and push air through my throat, but the sound that comes out is barely human. A dry, broken rasp, cracked and useless from years of silence. No one would hear it, even if there were anyone left to listen. The static grows so loud that I feel my eardrums might burst. I am shaking in the chair, bleeding from my nose and eyes, my mouth open in a silent scream. I beg. Not out loud, because I cannot speak, but inside my own mind. I beg whatever is doing this to stop. Please, please just let it stop. And then it does. The television goes black. The apartment is silent. The only sound is my own ragged breathing and the faint, wet drip of blood falling from my chin onto my shirt. I begin to sob, deep, shaking, ugly sobs that come from somewhere so far inside me that I did not know the place existed. It is over. It is finally over. And then she is there. Sweet, beautiful, innocent Sophia. She is on the screen, but she is also more than on the screen. She is present in the room in a way she has never been before. Her pale blonde hair is done up in pigtails. The pink bows tied ever so carefully, just the way Mama used to do them. Her pink lace dress is clean and dry. She looks exactly the way she did the morning I took her hand and walked her down that dirt road. She looks exactly the way she looked before I broke her. She raises her head slowly, and her eyes meet mine. They are black, not blue, not the crystal blue that every woman after her shared. They are black, deep and total and empty, like two holes cut into the fabric of everything that exists. They are the same darkness I felt in my hallway tonight. The same darkness that has been filling this apartment for years, every night, growing deeper, growing heavier, growing closer. She smiles at me. It is a child's smile, sweet and trusting. The same smile she gave me on the riverbank when I told her to trust her big brother. But blood is flowing from her mouth now, running over her small teeth and down her chin, dripping onto the pink lace of her dress. She stretches out one hand toward me. Her fingers are pale and small, but there is something wrong with them. They are too long, bent at angles that fingers should not bend, reaching toward me through the screen as if the glass is not there, as if nothing separates us anymore. Trust me, Lee, she says. Her voice is the same sweet voice that sang the lullaby, the same voice that has pulled me out of bed every night for longer than I can remember. I would never hurt you. The screen clicks, and everything goes dark. Story 3. I guess I should start by saying that I am a sophomore in high school. As embarrassing as it is to admit, I am not allowed to drive just yet, so my mom has to drop me off at school every single morning. I know a lot of kids my age take the bus, but I have never been a bus person. There is something about being crammed into that yellow tin can with 100 other teenagers at 7 in the morning that just does not appeal to me. So, my mom drives me, and I sit in the passenger seat and scroll through my phone, and we listen to whatever is playing on her radio station. And that is just how it has always been. That being said, this morning was pretty much identical to all the others. Mom drove me the 15 minutes to school, the same route we have taken every single day since freshman year. past the same gas station and the same strip mall and the same neighborhood with a big oak tree on the corner that drops leaves all over the sidewalk in the fall. She dropped me off in a bit of a hurry because we had been running a little late. I remember she was wearing her work clothes, a navy blue blouse and those gray slacks she likes, and her hair was pulled back in that low ponytail she always does when she does not have time to style it properly. She told me to have a good day and reminded me that she would pick me up at the usual time. And I grabbed my backpack and headed inside without really thinking about any of it. Just another morning. Just another day. I made it all the way to fourth period without anything unusual happening. I was sitting in the back of my history class, half listening to Mr. Patterson talk about something that happened 200 years ago, half watching the clock on the wall tick closer and closer to lunch when an announcement came over the intercom. At first, I did not even register that it was my name being called. The intercom at our school is old and crackly, and half the time you cannot understand what anybody is saying through it anyway. But then, the kid sitting next to me nudged my arm and said, "They just called you." And I sat up straighter and listened, and sure enough, they were asking me to come to the front office because I was being checked out early. Checked out early. Those 3 words are basically magic when you are a sophomore in high school. It does not matter what the reason is. It does not matter if someone died or if your house is on fire or if your mom just wants to take you to a dentist appointment. All that matters is that you are getting out of class, getting out of the building, escaping the fluorescent lights and the boring lectures and the weird smell that always lingers in the hallways near the gym. I actually had a little pep in my step as I gathered my stuff and headed toward the front office. A few of my classmates gave me jealous looks as I walked out the door, and I could not help but smile. I was still confused, though normally my mom would give me a heads up if she was planning to check me out early. She would text me the night before or mention it at breakfast or at least send me a quick message during one of her breaks at work. But I had not heard anything from her about this. Nothing at all. So as I walked down the empty hallway toward the front office, I pulled out my phone and sent her a quick text asking what the occasion was. I did not get a response right away, but when I rounded the corner and looked through the big glass window into the front office, I saw her standing there waiting for me. So I figured I would just ask her face to face. No big deal. But there was something off about her. It was hard to put my finger on exactly what it was. She was standing near the front desk, and she was looking at me through the window, and she was smiling. But it was the way she was smiling that made something in my stomach tighten just a little. It was not the kind of warm, motherly smile I was used to seeing from her. There was something else in it. Something I could not quite name. The best word I can think of is mischievous, but even that does not feel exactly right. It was like she was in on a joke that I was not aware of yet, like she was waiting for something to happen, and she already knew what it was, and she found the whole thing deeply amusing. I also noticed that she was not wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she dropped me off that morning. That struck me as strange. She had been in her navy blue blouse and gray slacks just a few hours ago, but now she was wearing something completely different. A plain black t-shirt and jeans. Casual clothes. The kind of thing she might wear on a weekend when she was just lounging around the house. It would have been pretty odd for her to have driven all the way home to change before coming to pick me up, especially since her job is a full 45 minutes in the opposite direction. The timing did not make any sense. But whatever. I was getting out of this hellhole early. That was all that really mattered in the moment. I pushed the weird feelings aside and walked through the office door and signed myself out at the front desk. And then we were heading outside together, me and my mom, walking across the parking lot toward her car. Except it was not her car. Not the one I knew, anyway. She actually had to guide me to it because I did not recognize it at all. I kept walking toward where she usually parked, toward the silver Honda Accord that she has driven for as long as I can remember. But she put her hand on my shoulder and steered me in a different direction, toward a car I had never seen before. A dark green sedan, older model, parked in the far corner of the lot. Apparently, the special occasion was that she had gotten a new car. That was what she told me, anyway. I thought it was kind of cute, honestly. She wanted to show off the new ride to her son. I could see her being excited about something like that. She had been talking about wanting to upgrade for a while now, complaining about the Accord's transmission and the weird noise it made when she turned left. So this made sense. This explained everything. The different clothes, the surprise checkout, all of it. She wanted to surprise me with the new car. I climbed into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt and tried not to think about how the interior did not smell like her. Her car always smelled like that vanilla air freshener she kept clipped to the vent, mixed with the faint scent of the hand lotion she used. This car smelled different. Stale, old, like something had been sitting in it for a long time without being cleaned. And speaking of not being cleaned, I did not know how she had managed to get the interior so dirty in such a short amount of time. The entire back seat was absolutely full of garbage. Fast food bags from places I did not even recognize, crumpled and greasy and shoved into every corner. Empty soda bottles rolling around on the floorboards. Napkins and receipts and candy wrappers and all manner of trash piled up like nobody had cleaned this car out in months, maybe years. It did not look like my mother's car at all. My mother was meticulous about keeping her vehicle clean. She would never let it get like this. Never in a million years. But I did not say anything about it. I figured maybe she had just bought it used and had not had time to clean it out yet. Or maybe the previous owner had been a slob and she was planning to take it to get detailed later. There were explanations. There were always explanations. I was probably just overthinking things because the whole situation felt a little off, and I needed to relax and enjoy the fact that I was getting out of school early. Once we were settled and she had started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I decided to ask the question that had been burning in my mind since the announcement came through the intercom. So, where are we going? Did you check your favorite son out to grab some lunch? Please tell me you did. I am starving. She laughed at that. But there was something about the laugh that felt wrong. It was too high, too sharp, like it was not quite connected to anything I had actually said. "Ha-ha, no," she replied, drawing the word out long and slow, like she was trying not to ruin a surprise. Almost like she was trying not to laugh even harder, like there was something hilarious happening that only she was aware of. I waited for her to say more, to explain where we were actually going, but she did not. She just kept driving, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, that weird little smile still playing at the corners of her mouth. I tried to create some dialogue after that. I asked her about her day. I asked her about the new car, where she got it, how much it cost, what made her finally decide to pull the trigger on a new vehicle. I asked her about work, about whether her boss was still being annoying, about whether she had talked to Aunt Linda recently. I was just trying to engage in a conversation, trying to fill the silence with something normal, but all of her responses were equally as dry and vague as that first one. One word, answers. Little shrugs. That same strange laugh. All I could really do was just be quiet and enjoy the ride, which I did for a while. I leaned my head against the window and watched the familiar streets roll by and told myself this was fine. This was nice, actually, quality time with Mom, even if the conversation was not flowing the way it usually did. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she was stressed about something. Maybe she was just really focused on whatever surprise she had planned and did not want to give anything away. However, when she started taking us out of town, it became increasingly difficult to keep my mouth shut. I knew every inch of our town. I had lived there my entire life. I knew which roads led where, which neighborhoods connected to which shopping centers, which back streets you could take to avoid traffic during rush hour. But the roads she was turning down now were not any of those. We were heading away from everything familiar, past the edge of the suburbs, past the last strip of fast food restaurants and gas stations, out into parts of the county I had never even seen before. The houses got more spread out. The trees got thicker. The road got narrower and rougher. The pavement cracked and patched in places, like it had not been properly maintained in years. We were already in completely unfamiliar territory, and she had still not told me where we were going. That was when my phone started to ring. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. Dad. Dad was calling me. I felt a little flicker of relief at that, like maybe he would have some answers. Maybe he knew what was going on. Maybe Mom had told him about the surprise and he was calling to be part of it. But when Mom noticed who was calling, her reaction was immediate. "Don't answer that," she said. I looked at her, confused. "What? Why not?" "He's going to ruin the surprise," she said, and there was that giggle again. That high, sharp giggle that did not sound right. Just let it ring. So I did. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, and then I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling strange about the whole thing. But then Dad called again, and again, and again. He must have called 5 or 6 times back to back, each call coming in almost immediately after the last one ended, like he was desperate to get through to me, like something was wrong and he needed to tell me about it right now. And each time the phone rang, Mom demanded that I did not answer. "Don't pick up," she said. "I mean it. Don't answer." But her voice was not stern the way it should have been. It was light, amused, and that giggle kept breaking through more and more with each phone call, like the whole situation was getting funnier and funnier to her with every passing second. I sat there, in the passenger seat of this car that did not smell right, with this woman who was not acting right, watching the unfamiliar trees blur past the window, and I felt something cold start to spread through my chest, something that felt a lot like fear. That was when a new notification came across my screen. Not a phone call this time. A text message. From Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not understanding, not wanting to understand, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Because Mom was sitting right next to me. Mom was driving the car. Mom had checked me out of school and shown me her new vehicle and told me not to answer Dad's calls because he was going to ruin the surprise. But the text message was from Mom's number, from the contact I had saved in my phone with her picture next to it, from the same number that had texted me 1,000 times before about dinner plans and homework reminders and what time she would be home from work. I opened the message with shaking fingers. "What are you talking about? I'm not checking you out today. Why aren't you answering your dad?" The cold in my chest turned to ice. I read the message again, and again, like maybe the words would change if I just kept looking at them, like maybe I was misunderstanding something simple and obvious. But the words did not change. And the woman sitting next to me, the woman who was still smiling that strange smile, the woman who was still driving us deeper and deeper into nowhere, did not say a word. She just kept driving. And laughing, that high, sharp, wrong little laugh. And I realized, with a horrible sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, that I had no idea who she was. I had no idea where we were going, and I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. The trees outside seemed darker now. The road seemed longer, and the car that did not smell like my mother's car kept moving forward, carrying me further and further away from everything I knew, toward something I could not see and could not understand and could not escape. I thought about grabbing the door handle. I thought about throwing myself out of the moving car. I thought about screaming, about fighting, about doing something, anything to get away from this person who looked like my mother but was not my mother, who smiled like something was funny but nothing was funny, who laughed like she already knew how this story was going to end. But I did not do any of those things. I just sat there, frozen, my phone clutched in my hand, the text message still glowing on the screen, and the woman who was not my mother kept driving. Story 4. The circus was no place for a girl like her. The whole thing smelled of elephant dung and wet hay, and the rusting metal framework of the tent did what it could to cover both smells, but failed miserably. Children screamed and ran in every direction, while drunk men stumbled and bumbled just beyond the tent walls, and exhausted mothers had to wrangle them all back home before the night got any worse. Mud stuck to her shoes as she peeked through the opening flap and looked out at the crowd gathering under the dim string lights. This was garbage. Complete and total garbage. Velvet curtains should be smooth against her fingers right now. She should be standing backstage at a packed theater, looking out at an audience of hundreds who had each paid a small fortune just to see her perform. Not this. Not a tent full of drunkards and unwilling wives dragged to a $5 freak show on the outskirts of some town nobody had ever heard of. This was not where she belonged. This was not what she was made for. Anger rose inside her like a tumor swelling at the back of her skull. It surged through her without warning, and she felt the familiar twitch in her fingers, the involuntary clenching that came whenever the bitterness got too heavy to hold down. She took a step back from the flap and felt more mud cling to her shoes, thick and cold and disgusting. A gruff voice called to her from somewhere in the dark behind the tent. He asked if she was about ready. He called her Joy. What an absolute joke of a name. It used to spark something beautiful inside her, hearing that name come off someone's lips with the same kind of reverence people reserve for something holy. Now she wanted to rip the word right out of the English language, to never hear it again for the rest of her life. That would be heaven. She called back to him in a voice as delicate as glass, telling him she just needed another minute. Her tone floated through the dark with a kind of effortless grace that did not match the rotting world around her. She saw his thumbs up from across the dim space, and then he left her alone. Her fingers fidgeted with the cloth gloves she wore, and a small wince crossed her face as the skin beneath them pulsed with a dull, familiar pain. She already knew what she would find, but she looked anyway. She peeled the glove off her left hand slowly and stared down at what was there. Still scarred, still ruined from the infection that had followed the damage. Her brow furrowed, and she wished more than anything that it could just be normal again. Photographers used to beg to photograph just her hands, if you can believe it. Just her hands. That was how perfect she had been. Beauty was her first gift. By the age of 7, she was already being pushed towards stardom, appearing in a commercial one day and landing a small part in a daytime soap opera the next. Before she even had time to understand what was happening, she was 18 years old, and her face was on the front page of newspapers. She was being called the next Hollywood starlet. She was destined for it. Everyone said so. The parties came first, then the meetings with producers and directors, rubbing shoulders with people whose names alone could open any door in the world. It was the best time of her life, and she had lived every second of it knowing she deserved all of it. She flexed her hand and pain shot through it immediately. The scars had never faded. They never would. She could never stand in those rooms again, never shake those hands again, never let anyone see what had become of her. Not with hands like these. She slipped the glove back on slowly, covering the damage, hiding her shame beneath smooth silk. Cheers erupted from beyond the tent, and her face scrunched with disgust. Morons, every single one of them. They were morons paying good money to gawk at the talentless and the discarded. Not a single person in that crowd had the ability to understand the kind of talent she possessed. The talent she used to possess. She let herself drift back to the way it used to be. The lights were blinding when she walked onto the stage. The announcer would call her name with a kind of theatrical grandeur that sent electricity through the air. Please welcome to the stage, Joyful Joy Donovan. And she would walk out in front of that crowd with a smile so wide it could light up a city block, her dress flowing behind her like water, and the roar of applause would fill every gap in the silence, until there was nothing left but sound and adoration. It was beautiful. When she spoke, they hung on every word. When she sang, they cried. When she smiled, they swooned like they had been hit with something they could not explain. It was all so effortless, so natural, like she had been built for exactly that purpose, and nothing else. Tears pricked at the corner of her eye. Only one of them could still produce tears, and she had to close it and force them back. No, they did not deserve her tears. None of them did. They deserved absolutely nothing from her. She took a few steps forward until she was standing just before the stage, though she refused to call it that. It was just old, rotting wood that barely held her weight, creaking and groaning every time she shifted. It was an insult to every real stage she had ever stood on. There was a time when the stage floor used to show her reflection. She had demanded it. The surface had to be polished enough to act as a mirror because she needed to see her own face looking back at her. She needed to know it was still perfect. And it always was, though it was nice to remind herself every now and then. Stage managers had been screamed at and humiliated if the floor was not shining bright enough, to the point where theaters were warned weeks in advance whenever Joy Donovan was scheduled to perform so they could prepare accordingly. Maybe that was why she ended up here. Maybe she had been too proud, too difficult to work with. No, she shook the thought away as soon as it formed. She had done nothing wrong. She did not deserve this. She did not deserve to become this. She took a long, deep breath and steadied herself behind the tent curtain. Out on the stage, the strongmen were doing their usual act, ripping phone books in half or bending metal bars or whatever it was they did. She did not care enough to watch. 2 more acts, and then it would be her turn, and she would walk out there and be stared at by every last one of those morons in the crowd. They would not care that she hit every note perfectly. They would not notice that her movements were flawless, that her timing was impeccable, that her voice could make angels weep. No. All they would care about was the burned freak with the eye patch. That was all anyone ever cared about anymore. It had not always been that way. Not back then. Not when the entire world was at her fingertips and everyone held their breath around her, stunned into silence by her beauty and her voice and everything she represented. She had a movie deal before it all fell apart. Her face was going to be on the silver screen. Millions of people were finally going to see what she could do, were finally going to recognize the depth of her talent and understand that she had been made for this life. She remembered sitting in the room with the producers and the director, the script sitting on the table in front of her. She had just finished reading it. and her smile lit up the entire room when she put it down. She said it was perfect. The producers released the breath they had been holding, and the director clasped his hands together with relief. One of the suits told her they had written the role with her specifically in mind, but she barely heard him. Her eyes were glued to the stack of paper. The title on the front page read, Tree of Life. It was a stupid name, and she fully intended to get them to change it. But that did not matter. Everything inside those pages, every scene, every line, it had been made for her. Hollywood, this entire life, had been made for her. Her fingers twirled absently in her hair while she thought about it. Brunette waves curling around her fingertips the way they always did when she was happy. At least she still had that. She touched her hair now, standing in the dim light behind the tent curtain, and it was still silky smooth, still full of life, cut just above her shoulders the way she liked it. When she looked in a mirror these days, her hair was the only thing that made her feel human. It was still beautiful. It was still the way it was supposed to be. It was the one thing she had left that matched what she deserved. She let the memory continue. She had been sitting in front of her dressing room mirror, fixing her makeup with a kind of careful precision that came from years of practice, when the door behind her flew open and slammed against the wall. She did not even turn around to see who it was. She already knew. She had been expecting Ashley to show up eventually. The woman stormed in screaming, calling her every name she could think of. Joy continued applying her makeup without looking up. She told Ashley that was no way to talk to the leading lady and called her darling, the kind of word that sounds like a compliment but cuts like a knife when said with the right tone. Ashley screamed that Joy had gotten her replaced, that after everything she had done, after everything she had sacrificed, Joy had gone behind her back and stolen her part. Joy corrected her without missing a beat. She said she had not done anything. She said Ashley had gotten herself recast with her pathetic attempt at acting. Ashley's face twisted into a scowl so tight it looked painful. Ashley told her what she had to do to get that role in the first place. She said she had to sleep with one of the producers, called him a disgusting pig, and her voice turned into a screech as she asked how Joy could do this to her. Joy finished her lipstick, popped her lips together, smiled at her own reflection, and stood up from the chair. The smile stayed on her face the entire time, completely unbothered by Ashley's rage. She told Ashley again that she had not done anything and suggested she own her mistakes. But even now, years later, standing in the mud behind a circus tent, Joy could not remember exactly why she had made that decision, why she had gone to the producers and pushed to have Ashley removed from the film. Maybe she had been afraid. Ashley was younger, a genuinely talented actress, and she represented a threat to Joy's perfect world, and threats had to be dealt with. It was the only logical option at the time. She did not regret it. Not one bit. Everything she had ever done, she had done for a reason. She peeked through the tent flap again and saw the fortune tellers setting up their table on the stage. Even bigger frauds than Hollywood producers. That thought actually made Joy laugh, and it was one of the few things in her life that still could. It was only 2 nights after that confrontation with Ashley when everything changed. All had been going well. The movie's title had been changed to Her Destiny at Joy's request, and filming was supposed to start the very next day. Should have. Those 2 words haunted her more than anything else in the English language. Should have implied a future that was stolen, a life that was erased before it even had a chance to begin. Or it could have been. That was a living hell all on its own. There was a knock at her door in the middle of the night. Joy woke up and checked the clock. It was 2 in the morning. She dragged herself out of bed and wandered toward the door, groggy and confused, wondering who could possibly be visiting at this hour. She did not have time to wonder for long. When she opened the door, the pain began immediately. A constant, unimaginable burning spread across her face and dripped down onto her hands. A scream ripped through her body as she collapsed to the ground, clawing at her own face, desperate to do anything to make it stop. But it would not stop. Her skin, her beautiful skin, she could feel it melting off her face like wax sliding off a candle. Her eyes would not open. Her mouth would not close. The screaming never stopped. The next thing she knew, she was in a hospital. She could only see out of her left eye. The right one saw nothing at all, just darkness. As her working eye darted around the room in a panic, she saw the bandages covering most of her body, and the urge to scream came rushing back. A doctor explained what had happened. She had been the victim of an acid attack, a horrific, senseless attack. They had done everything they could to help her. Skin grafts, cosmetic surgery, multiple procedures. But there was only so much they could do. The damage was extensive. Joy demanded a mirror. The doctor told her he would strongly suggest waiting until she was fully healed before looking at herself. She screamed at him. She told him she wanted a mirror right now. She ignored the searing pain that shot through her body and ripped the bandages off her own face with her damaged hands. Still, only her left eye worked. The doctor's hands were shaking as he held a small mirror up in front of her. The person who looked back was not Joy. Her right eye was covered in a white, milky film that looked like clouded glass. Her right cheek drooped underneath it, pulling the skin downward in a way that looked melted and wrong. Her lips were fixed into a permanent half-smile, thanks to the stitches holding them together, a cruel imitation of the real smile that used to make people fall in love with her. Her chin was scarred beyond recognition. Her lips looked forever cracked and dry. Her forehead looked like it was being held together by nothing more than sheer willpower and medical tape. Every part of her body told her to cry. Her mind told her to cry. Everything inside her was screaming for release, begging for the relief that tears would bring. Instead, she laughed. She laughed until the sound filled the hospital room and bounced off the sterile white walls and made the doctor take a step back in alarm. The headline ran in every newspaper and on every television screen within days. Up-and-coming actress Ashley Wilde had been arrested for the acid attack on Joy Donovan. That headline stuck in Joy's mind like a splinter she could never pull out. Ashley, sitting behind bars, staring at concrete walls, wondering for the rest of her miserable life whether she could have been a star if she had just kept her jealousy in check. After that, the meetings came one after another, and they all ended the same way. A man in a suit who could not even look her in the eye, even when she wore the mask, sitting across from her and telling her how sorry he was, telling her the studio believed they needed to go in a different direction. She heard that phrase so many times it stopped having meaning. A different direction, as if her talent had changed, as if her voice had been damaged along with her face. Just like that, every door that had ever been opened to her slammed shut at the same time, and her entire world ended, almost ended. She found herself standing on the edge of a bridge on the outskirts of town, looking down at the dark river below. Her legs were shaking. Her gloved hand was wrapped around the thick wire railing so tightly her knuckles ached beneath the fabric. She was ready to let go, ready to step off and let the water take whatever was left of her. Then a voice came from behind her, soft, British, polite, in the way that only the British can be polite when they are interrupting something deeply private. The man asked if she was Joyful Joy. She did not turn around. She mumbled that she was not anymore. He apologized for intruding and told her he had an offer for her. He came closer, hat in his hands, and spoke to her like she was still someone worth speaking to. That alone was enough to make her loosen her grip on the wire. The ringmaster's voice boomed from center stage now, snapping Joy back to the present. He was giving his big closing speech, the one he gave every night with the same theatrical enthusiasm that never seemed to fade no matter how small or disinterested the crowd was. He bellowed that they had all seen the greatest show on earth tonight, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Then he told them what they already knew, that the best was always saved for last. Joy closed her eye and steadied her breathing. He told the crowd the story the way he always did. He said that once upon a time, this woman was Hollywood's next big thing, until a terrible accident befell her. He told them not to pity her. He said she was the very definition of strength and survival and perseverance, and that despite what the world had done to her, she continued to follow her destiny. Joy allowed herself a genuine smile at that. The ringmaster had always been gracious. He was one of the few people left in the world who treated her like a human being instead of a spectacle. He asked the crowd to put their hands together for joyful Joy Donovan. She walked out onto the stage with a kind of effortless grace that had not left her body despite everything it had been through. A delicate piano tune floated up behind her, following her movements like a shadow. The crowd gasped the moment they saw her face, and a hushed wave of whispers swept through the tent like wind through dead leaves. This was always the worst part. The whispers. She could not hear the exact words, but she did not need to. She knew the kinds of things being said. She had heard them all before, whispered behind hands and muttered under breath, and every single one of them cut deeper than any acid ever could. She blocked it out. That was all she could do. She focused on the beautiful notes drifting up from the piano. Let them wash over her. Let them fill the empty spaces where her confidence used to live. Ashley's face flashed through her mind one more time, sitting in that cold cell somewhere, forced to live with the memory of what she had done, forced to remember the day she destroyed an innocent woman's life out of nothing but jealousy and rage. Knowing that Ashley was rotting in that cell was the only thing that made any of this bearable. And then, Joy opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice filled every corner of the tent, rising up through the stale air and the smell of hay and the rusting metal framework until it reached the very top of the canvas ceiling and hung there like something sacred. The whispers stopped, every single one of them. The entire crowd fell silent, and she could feel the shift in the room. The moment when they stopped seeing the scars and the drooping skin and the eye patch and started hearing what was actually in front of them. Despite that face, despite the damage and the ruin and the permanent disfigurement, her voice was as beautiful as it had ever been. Not a single note was out of place. Not a single breath was wasted. She sang and the past washed away, all of it. The acid and the hospitals and the rejection and the bridge and the mud and the elephant dung and the $5 admission price. None of it mattered. She was still here. Under the lights, under the gaze of hundreds of people who had come expecting a freak and found something else entirely, she was still exactly where she was supposed to be, despite what had been done to her, despite what she had been reduced to. Despite every door that had been slammed in her face and every dream that had been ripped away, here she was, still standing, still singing, still commanding a room with nothing but her voice and the unshakable knowledge that she was meant for this. No matter what anyone said, no matter what anyone thought when they looked at her ruined face, she was a star. She had always been a star. And no amount of acid or rejection or pity or cruelty would ever change that. She was a goddamn star. Story 5. I am not entirely sure how to start this. You are all probably going to think I am crazy no matter what I say. Whatever way I try to spin this, the outcome is always the same. I just wanted us to have a happy anniversary. My girlfriend and I had just celebrated our third only a week before the trip. That is why we came here in the first place. The Tunnel of Trees. That is what they called it. A mile-long trail, completely sheltered by the long, thick branches of oak trees that stretched overhead and wove together until they blocked out the sky. We had been talking about this trip for months. We lived all the way across the country, so this was a huge deal for both of us. We had saved up for it, planned every little detail, and counted down the days like kids waiting for Christmas morning. When the day of our flight finally arrived, we could hardly contain ourselves. My girlfriend was practically bouncing off the walls as we got ready to leave. She squealed and said she could not believe it, that she could not believe we were finally going. She asked if her hair looked okay because she wanted to make sure she looked amazing when we landed. Then she started to ask if I remembered something, and I cut her off before she could finish. I told her, of course, I'd turned the stove off, asked what she took me for, an amateur. I told her yes, her hair looked stunning as always. She smirked at me and said she was actually going to ask if I remembered to lock the door, but good to know I remembered the stove. She called it the pinnacle of the male mind, looking up at me with those shimmering brown eyes of hers. It was like I could not help but fall in love with her over and over again, every single day. She completely scrambled my brain every time she looked at me like that. I told her I loved her and that I was so glad we were doing this. That was all I could think to say. Even though we had a late night flight, neither of us could sleep for the entire 5-hour trip. We were too wired, too excited, too full of nervous energy to close our eyes for even a second. As soon as we touched down, we went straight to pick up the rental car, and from there it was straight into the city to explore. We walked through streets and ducked into shops and ate at a little cafe that had the best coffee I have ever tasted. We adventured through the city until around noon before we started getting a little restless. My girlfriend chirped at me and asked if it was time yet while licking her chocolate ice cream cone. I made a big show of checking my watch and told her I supposed it was, doing my best to sound sarcastic and unbothered even though my heart was racing. I told her to come on, let us go see some trees. The first thing that struck me as odd was the fact that we were the only car in the parking lot. It was a cloudless day, 75 degrees, absolutely perfect weather. There was no reason at all for the lot to be this empty. It was a popular destination, the kind of place that shows up on every travel blog and social media page. There should have been dozens of cars, families unloading coolers, couples taking selfies in front of the entrance sign. But there was nothing, just our white rental Kia sitting alone in a sea of empty spaces. My girlfriend leaned forward in her seat and whispered dramatically that they had the whole place to themselves. I rolled my eyes and put the car in park, then walked around to the passenger side to open her door for her. I called her a dork and told her to come on, let us go enjoy our serenity. I was fully prepared to find an empty path. Given the parking lot situation, it only made sense. However, as soon as we approached the entrance to the tunnel, I was absolutely stunned to find what looked like hundreds of people. They were everywhere, walking along the trail, milling about under the branches, moving in both directions. It had me scratching my head, sure, but I do not know why I did not question it more than I did. I guess I was just so entranced by the tunnel itself. It truly was just as beautiful as every picture I had ever seen of it. The branches of the oak trees reached across from both sides and intertwined above the path, creating this living green canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft golden patches on the dirt below. It was like walking into a painting. It was like stepping into another world entirely. I looked down at my girlfriend, and the look on her face was enough to melt my heart completely. That sparkle came back to her eyes, and her smile stretched from ear to ear as she spun in a slow circle with her head tilted back, staring up at the branches above us. She looked so happy, so free, so completely in the moment that I wanted to freeze time and stay there forever. At the far end of the path, way off in the distance, there was what looked like a long white picket fence. I asked her if she thought that was the exit. She told me to stop thinking about the exit and to look around and embrace it. She was right, of course. She usually was. Our walk started slow at first. I am talking an absolute snail's pace. We were trying to soak up as much of the scenery as possible, and were in no rush whatsoever to be done. We held hands and pointed out little details to each other. The way the light came through the leaves, the texture of the bark on the older trees, the way the path curved gently ahead of us, like it was leading us somewhere magical. It felt perfect. It felt like exactly what we needed. However, after about an hour or two, we actually started picking up the pace a bit. Something felt off, though I could not put my finger on it right away. I asked my girlfriend if the fence looked like it had gotten any closer. She was quiet for a moment, thinking about it. And then she said no, it did not. But it had to be getting closer, right? She asked how long they said the trail was. I told her a mile or two, I believed. I said we must have just been walking slower than we thought. We both kind of laughed it off and kept going, but there was something sitting in the pit of my stomach that would not go away. A feeling, small but persistent, that something was not right. By the time 5 hours had passed, we were in full-blown panic. 5 hours of walking on a trail that was supposed to be a mile or two long. My legs were sore. My feet were throbbing. And that white fence in the distance looked exactly as far away as it had when we first started. That was when we began to notice something we had completely overlooked before. It was a small detail, but once we saw it, we could not unsee it. And it changed everything. Every single person walking alongside us was dressed in clothing that looked decades old. Not old as in worn out, but old as in from a completely different era. Some of them were wearing styles that looked like they came from the 20s or 30s, high-waisted trousers and suspenders, flapper-style dresses with beaded fringe. Others were dressed like they had stepped straight out of the 50s or 60s, poodle skirts and leather jackets and slicked-back hair. There were people in bell-bottoms and tie-dye from the 70s, neon windbreakers from the 80s, flannel shirts and baggy jeans from the 90s. Every decade was represented, but none of them were wearing anything modern. None of them looked like they belonged in the same century as us. And none of them acknowledged us. Not a single one. They drifted past with their eyes fixed on the dirt path in front of them, moving forward with this slow mechanical rhythm, like zombies. No one spoke. No one looked up. No one stopped to admire the trees or take a picture or rest their feet. They just walked, endlessly, silently, eyes down, feet shuffling through the dirt. I said that was enough and told my girlfriend we were turning around. It felt like a solid plan in the moment, something we should have done 3 hours earlier, but it proved completely useless. When we turned and looked back the way we had come, the path stretched out behind us for what looked like miles and miles, far more than the distance we had actually walked. It looked like we had already covered at least 20 miles since we started, and the entrance was nowhere in sight. It was just more tunnel, more trees, more dirt path, more silent people in old-fashioned clothing drifting past us like ghosts. My girlfriend asked what was happening, her voice high and strained and shaking. I told her to relax, that we were going to get out of there. I promised her. I said if it was the last thing I did, I was getting us back to that parking lot. So we turned back around and kept walking toward the fence. With each step, it started to seem like we were actually getting closer. Slowly, painfully slowly, the fence went from being a tiny, distant landmark on the horizon to something that looked like it was almost within reach. My legs ached beyond anything I had ever felt. My entire body was screaming at me to stop. My girlfriend slowed down to an absolute crawl beside me. She told me she could not do this, that it had been something like 8 hours. She asked how the sun was still in the sky. She said she was so hot, so thirsty, and she just wanted to go home. I told her I knew that I wanted to go home too. I told her to just keep walking. As we walked, the crowds of people continued to brush past us. They avoided touching us, always swerving at the last second, but we could still feel the wind from their movement, that faint rush of air as they passed, and the fence looked farther away than ever. I could not take it anymore. My mind was bending under the weight of everything, and I could feel it threatening to snap at any moment. That is why I grabbed my girlfriend by the wrist and started running as fast as I could down the path, dragging her behind me and refusing to let go of her arm no matter what. That is when the leaves started changing. The previously green leaves on the branches above us began to morph right before our eyes. First they turned bright yellow, then dark orange, then brown, and then, one by one, they started falling from the trees. They drifted down around us like nature was fast-forwarding through its own calendar. And suddenly we were crunching through dead leaves that covered the path in thick layers. We pounded our feet against the ground, pushing harder and harder until our legs became wobbly and unbalanced beneath us. When the snow started falling, it came down in buckets. Not a gentle flurry or a light dusting, but heavy, thick snow that coated the ground in white powder and buried the decaying leaves beneath it. We stopped to catch our breath, standing in the middle of a frozen tunnel that had been warm and green only moments ago. I gasped and asked how this was possible, my lungs burning with every breath. I said it just could not be possible. I felt myself starting to cry. The frigid air froze the tears to my cheeks and turned my nose bright red and dripping. But I knew I had to pull it together for my girlfriend. When I looked at her, she looked empty, completely hollow and void of any life or emotion, just standing there in the snow with this blank, distant expression on her face, like something inside her had simply switched off. I could not afford the luxury of falling apart right now. I needed to be precise. I needed to be strong. I told her to listen to me. I said we could not stop, that if we stopped, we were only falling further behind. I told her I would carry her if she needed me to. She did not even respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground as she dragged herself forward, one mechanical step at a time. She was quiet for a long while after that. I do not know how long we walked. It could have been minutes or it could have been months. Time had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. But eventually the snow began to melt. The white powder thinned out and turned to slush, and then to puddles, and then to nothing. And the sun came back, warm and golden, filtering through the branches above us. And when I looked ahead, the fence was right there. So close I could practically reach out and touch it. My girlfriend's gaze remained fixed on the ground the entire time. She had not spoken a single word in what felt like an eternity. With each step, her feet dragged through the dirt, leaving small trails behind her. I realized at some point that there was no one else on the trail anymore. Just me and her, completely alone. The silent crowds in their old-fashioned clothing had vanished. The trees had their green leaves again, full and lush and beautiful, as if nothing had ever happened. And for the first time since we started walking, the fence did not seem to drift further away as we got closer. We inched forward, closer and closer and closer. We finally found ourselves standing right on the other side of the fence, one single step away from being done with this nightmare. Only my girlfriend seemed hesitant. She stopped walking, and something about her body language told me she was not ready to leave. She stood there staring at the fence, and I could see something building behind her eyes, something I did not understand. Her silent hesitation suddenly exploded into a violent, emotional outburst. She started thrashing around, prying my hand off her wrist with a strength I had never felt from her before, the strength of a full-grown man. She kept repeating the same words over and over. She said I just did not get it. She swore to God I did not get it. She was laughing and sobbing all at once, throwing herself to the ground and hugging her sides while tears streamed down her face. I did not know what to do. Honestly, who would know what to do in a situation like that? The only thing that made sense to me in that moment was to physically drag her through the white fence and off the trail. She screamed like a wild animal as we passed through, this raw primal sound that did not sound like it could come from a human being. But the moment we crossed to the other side, she fell completely silent. Her eyes went dead. The only way I can describe her appearance in that moment is completely and utterly hopeless. And I cannot even blame her, because I felt the same way. After all that walking, all that insane psychological torture that the universe had decided to dump onto the two of us for however long it had actually been, we somehow ended up right back in the empty parking lot. Our white Kia was sitting there waiting for us, exactly where we had left it. My girlfriend started laughing again. No tears this time, just pure, unhinged laughter that brought her to her knees on the asphalt. She said she told me. She said she told me I did not get it. She said if only I could see the look on my face. I checked my watch, and the number I saw made my stomach drop through the floor. It had been one single hour since we started our walk. 1 hour. After what felt like an entire lifetime of walking through seasons and snow and crowds of silent ghosts, only 60 minutes had passed in the real world. I turned to my girlfriend and begged her to tell me what she meant. I asked what she was getting that I apparently was not. I asked what she knew, what the big secret was. She just laughed harder, falling nearly silent as she doubled over and struggled to breathe. I could not take it anymore. I screamed at her to stop laughing and tell me. I grabbed her by the face, my hands on both of her cheeks, and forced her to look at me. Her smile faded almost immediately, and in a dull, flat, monotone voice that did not sound like her at all. She gave me the exact answer I had been so desperately hoping I would not hear. She said we had always been here. Then she went back to laughing, softer now, more like giggling than anything, this quiet, breathless sound that was somehow worse than the screaming. I told her that was enough, that we were leaving before she actually lost her mind completely. I pulled my keys from my back pocket and turned toward the parking lot, and that is when I felt my heart drop into my stomach before shooting back up into my throat. Every single empty space was now occupied by a white Kia. Dozens of them. Hundreds even. Each one completely identical to ours. Same make, same model, same color, same everything. They filled the entire parking lot, row after row after row, stretching out in every direction until I could not see the edges anymore. It was like someone had copied and pasted our rental car into every available space while we were on the trail. And just like the fence, it seemed like the more I searched, the further away I got from the real one. We must have gone to every single car in that lot, trying the key in door after door, clicking the unlock button on the remote over and over and listening for the beep. My girlfriend trailed behind me the entire time, not helping, just watching me with this knowing look on her face, this awful, sad little smile that made me want to shake her. We finally found the original Kia. I do not know how, and honestly, I do not care. You would think that identical cars would have identical keys, and maybe they did, but somehow only one of them responded to ours. My girlfriend told me it did not matter. She said none of what I was doing mattered. I ignored her. I got in the car, and she got in the passenger seat. And I backed out of the parking spot before slamming my foot on the gas and burning rubber toward the exit. As we approached the edge of the lot, I noticed something in my peripheral vision that made my skin crawl. The people from the trail, all of them, every single one in their outdated clothing, were lined up along the fence. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, completely still, and they were watching us as we peeled out of the parking lot. Their eyes followed the car, and for the first time since we had been on the trail, they were actually looking at something. They were looking at us. My girlfriend muttered something under her breath and raised her hand in a small wave toward the crowd. She said, "See you soon." I looked at her sideways. She was definitely going to need professional help after this. Then again, we both were. We made it about 10 miles down the road without exchanging a single word. I did not want to push or prod her for answers. I did not want to talk about what had just happened. I just wanted to forget. We had made it out. That was what mattered. And after a little bit of time and maybe some therapy, we could put this whole nightmare behind us and never speak of it again. That is what I kept telling myself as I drove, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. While these thoughts were circulating around in my head, the car made a sound that it definitely should not have made. A grinding, sputtering, choking sound, followed by a loud pop. And then thick black smoke started pouring out from under the hood. I cursed and hit the steering wheel. My girlfriend's quiet snickering started up again beside me. This soft little laugh that was barely audible over the sound of the dying engine. I had no choice. There were no other options. The car was done. All I could do was limp it slowly into the nearest parking lot and hope we could call for help. Luckily, there were plenty of empty parking spaces.